My name is Pierre Filion. I'm 75. I was born on December 30th and never had a gift for my birthday because my parents always told me, you had your gifts at Christmas, don't complain. I was born in Montreal, raised in Montreal, and then I moved to the South Shore, where I've lived since 1973. And no, I don't have a lacrosse nickname. Everybody in lacrosse called me Pierre. One friend of mine, Jim Price out of Ontario, once called me Powerful Pierre, but I didn't like that, But no, I don't have a nickname, I'm just Pierre.
Your first involvement with lacrosse was at Brebeuf?
Yes.
Talk about Brebeuf.
Listen, Brebeuf is a Jesuit college where you learn Latin and Greek and humanities, but you also play lacrosse. That was not an option. It was part of the curriculum. Every kid that went there played lacrosse. So I played lacrosse. I wasn't very good at it, but I loved it. I liked it. There was something about this aerial game that was different from the other games that we played. And so I played for the school team for the 8 years that you're there. And get to think of it, if I played for the school team, I probably was a decent player.
Yeah. You coached at the school as well, didn't you?
I coached a Bantam team. Fun thing about having kids is they're there all the time. Like if they're staying at the school and they sleep at the school. And so I was a student in my final years, and I was asked to coach the Bantam team. And we had a lot of fun. One of the great souvenirs that I had is I think I was 17, 18, maybe, I don't remember exactly, but we organized a tour of Western Quebec and Eastern Ontario with 14-year-old kids. I was probably 18, all by myself. And we played Montreal, we played in Cornwall, we played in Ganawagi, and we played in Akwesasne. And it was within that tour that I discovered that for the North American Indians, the game was different than it was to us. Like, we were from a school, we played lacrosse, that was the game. When we went to Akwesasne, which was called St. Regis at the time, the Jesuit priests who had helped us organize this, told me, you're playing on native land here, this is a little special. It didn't, but then we played them. And there was this guy on the Akwesasne team named Travis Cook. My God, this guy was good. We lost the game. I think the final score, I know the final score was Travis Cook 11, our team 8. I had never seen someone as passionate, as dedicated, as talented. It was the first time that I saw a player play with both hands, shooting while running from the opposite side. He was just outstanding, and we befriended after, and we've been friends for a long, long time now. But that's probably on that trip that I discovered the difference between the game for us white guys and for the North American Indians. It just dawned on me.
Do you think Brebeuf carried the game because of that relationship?
Probably, but I will answer, I don't know. But what I do know is that it was a sacred game at Brebeuf. You had to play this game, and you had to play it well, you had to learn it well, you had to teach it well, you had to coach it well. There was something nice about playing this game. I know it's still played today at Brebeuf. They have field teams. I don't think they have box teams now. But listen, I was there from 58 to 65. And now we're 2021, and they're still playing the game.
What did you do next?
Well, I was a student. I got a teacher's diploma, and I got a diploma in sociology at the University of Montreal. In that time, I was totally out of lacrosse. I just was a student of sociology, and I just loved it. I loved it, Spent most of my time doing that. And as soon as I graduated, somebody asked me, we have a junior team. Do you want to coach this junior team? So I said, why not? So I coached, and then eventually I became hired by the Quebec Lacrosse Federation as technical director in '75, and I went on till 2017. I was hired as part-time in '73 to help with the Quebec Canada Games team, and went on afterwards as being full-time as technical director for the Quebec Federation.
I've heard you say there are three people you owe your love of the game to, and maybe go through these three people and why they were so important.
Well, they brought different things to my life. The first fantastic person that I had the pleasure and privilege of being associated with was Jim Bishop. Jim Bishop was an outstanding person. In 1975, he coached the Montreal pro team called Les Québécois, and I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to meet him close. Game days, after game days, training session, practice, team meetings. He was a passionate person who kind of told me somehow, what you do for lacrosse, there's a dignity to being involved in the game of lacrosse. And he also mentioned very often, what you do might seem enough, it's never enough. You can always do better than the best thing that you've done. He was a workhorse himself. He was a powerful person, a great motivator. So Jim was someone I truly loved. He was fantastic in the game, and if I have a certain passion for the game, I think I owe it to Jim Bishop. Bishop always made himself available, anyway, to me. And one day I asked him, do you want to run, we're running a clinic for about 25 coaches. It's a one-day clinic, and we'd love to have you here. So he said, no problem, when is it? So we told him it was this day. And he said, well, I have a game at 8 o'clock at the Montreal Forum on that day. I will do it for you, but I have to be at the Forum at 5 o'clock to prepare, you know. So we said, no problem, Mr. Bishop, we're going to pick you up in Saint-Sauveur at 7:30, take you there, you have breakfast with everybody, you have lunch with everybody, and at 4 o'clock there'll be a driver taking you to the Montreal Forum. So we go on all day. He didn't stop, and we had hundreds of questions prepared, so coaches were peppering him, you know. And the more we got into the day, the more excited he got, the more nervous he got, and you could see that there was a game for him tonight, you know, that night. Yeah. So about 3 o'clock, 3 something, final question, because we knew he had to leave at 4. Mr. Bishop, how do you prepare a team? How do you talk to your team before a game? And then it was a trance. The man was possessed. He asked the young coaches. Most of them spoke a little bit of English. Most of them understood English, but they were French guys, you know, basically, so they missed a few things along the day. So he asked them, can you sit in a square, you know? So we took our chairs and, you know, and I'm there, you know. And then he says, he gets into an act as if each of the players were the players, or each of the coaches were the players on his Montreal Québécois pro team. And he challenged, he was getting up, pointing, and you, John Davis, you are not God, you can check, this is a stick, you can't just score, you gotta check John Davis. So the kid who was there was just paranoid, and then he moved on from player to player, and you, Dale McKenzie, and you, Dave Litzenberger. It was outside. We were all sitting there, guys were shaking, you know, everybody was paranoid. And then all of a sudden, he ended up saying, like, these people in Montreal adopted us. They adopted you. They adopted you. They adopted our game. You must have heart for these people. And you were sitting there, and and then he left because he had a game that night. So our driver took him to the Forum. He was there at 5 o'clock, and I think they probably won. But can you imagine what it must be every game in his dressing room with this guy challenging, probably bringing the best out of everybody. But I remember that when he left, we all sat there for minutes, and we were saying, what happened? What has happened here? You know. So we said, either this man is a genius, or he's passionately possessed by the game. I think it was both. He was a fantastic guy. He was unreal, absolutely unreal. Demanding person, demanding upon himself also. Yeah. He was a lacrosse passionate. That was it, you know, that was it. The second person is probably unknown to the lacrosse community, but not unknown to the Quebec lacrosse community. His name is Gilles Néron. Gilles Néron is a PhD in physical education, graduate of Florida State University, who was involved in hockey most of the time, and who presented a probe to the Quebec government in '76 about violence. I think it was '77, on violence in hockey. At the time, you'll remember, hockey was a very violent game in Quebec. The junior league was just, it was terrible. So he got himself involved into a probe, writing an essay, a huge essay, which became a very important document. And I was working with the Quebec Lacrosse Federation, and I received that, and I said, okay, I'll read it. I didn't know Gilles Néron at all. I read this and I say, hey, listen, this can apply to lacrosse. If you have any bit of integrity, any bit of honesty, what he's saying about hockey is the same problems that we have. So I called him up and I said, Mr. Néron, can I meet with you? I'm with lacrosse. And I said, no problem. So I meet him in a small little restaurant. And it was a terrible meeting because I was sitting in front of an academic person who was asking me questions and taking notes. Never answered my requirements for help, but he was asking questions on the game. So I had brought my books, my rule book and the technical documents, and I leave this with him. And when I came back to my office, I told someone, oh, this is going to go nowhere. This guy's probably going to write an article on violence in lacrosse, and that's going to be it, and we'll never hear about it anymore. Probably 3 weeks later, I get this phone call. Terrible moment in my life. Pierre, I've read your documents, I've looked at my notes, I have 74 questions for you, and then he just totally destroyed me. Made me realize that if there was violence in lacrosse, if there were problems in lacrosse, the first person I should look at as being responsible for everything was myself. He said, you write this in the rule book, you write this in your technical document, these are contradictory statements, Pierre. Oh, and then he went through the rule book. What is this definition of a slash? What is legal, what is not legal? Couldn't answer that, So there were so many questions where he made me realize that I was missing it. I was blaming others instead of saying, look inwards, what are you responsible for? And that kind of changed my perspective on life. And now I don't blame people anymore. I just say, I haven't done this properly, and I need to correct this, I need to correct that. So he was a driving force. He was involved afterwards in fair play, the promotion of fair play and ethics in sports. He was involved with the Canadian Commission for the Betterment of Hockey, the Canadian Fair Play Commission, and he became, in Quebec anyway, an outstanding figure in terms of integrity, research, and responsibility. He made us all become more responsible towards ourselves and towards everybody else, and towards, in my case, the Quebec Lacrosse Federation and the members. So he was an outstanding man. He's a friend of mine now. I look to him for advice, for guidance, but he's a tower of strength intellectually and in terms of ethics and fair play. So he changed my life, I must say. I wouldn't have done what I've done with the Quebec Federation if I hadn't met Gilles Néron, an outstanding person. And the other great person that I met is a lacrosse player by the name of Joe Cambria. Joe Cambria came into my life when I was coaching a junior team. He was 15 years old. When you talk about Gretzky, when you talk about Bobby Orr, or you talk about any fantastic player that comes along, very often you also talk about a fantastic person. Like Joe Cambria was 15 years old playing with 21-year-olds, and he just came and he was there and he stole the game from everybody. He was dominating the game, and we had a team captain, and the team captain got his assistants and said, this kid has to wear the A for assistant. He's 15. He would talk to players with respect, but bring the best out of them. We didn't coach Joe Cambria. We admired Joe Cambria as a player. He knew everything. He could see everything coming. He could prepare. He was offense. He was defense. And he had a personality, outstanding personality. I very often say he was our Jean Beliveau and he was my Bobby Orr. He was just athletically outstanding, and as a person, I have yet to meet someone with better empathy, with better appreciation for people, with better interpersonal relationship. He has a talent for listening to people, understanding people, and having empathy for everyone. He's an outstanding person. He became the president of the Quebec Federation, obviously, after he played. He was an outstanding junior player, outstanding senior player, led the Can-Am League in scoring, and then went into business. And now he's the vice president of an international firm involved in safety, electronics, and he's just an outstanding man. He's also a friend of mine, and he's made my life so much better. I can't say I have his ability to listen as he does, but I try.
You were 43 years involved with Quebec Lacrosse, and I wondered if you could maybe take, 4 or 5 of the highlights over those years about what you feel were important things for you to be involved in.
Well, I would say the first involvement was to create from nothing a sports governing body, a provincial sports governing body, in a time where there were no resources, no funding. I remember the first day I was on the job, there was an envelope on my desk, and I was told by the then president, in this envelope you'll find everything you need to know about what you have to do. So I opened the envelope, and it said the bathroom are at the end of the corridor on the right-hand side. That was my introduction. That was the position paper they gave me to start. So we built a sports governing body with a board of directors, democratic processes, bylaws, rule books, training sessions, coaching sessions, building leagues, junior league, senior league, juvenile league, provincial championships. All that a sport governing body does, but doesn't do when there isn't anything. So we started. And we created a democratic run provincial body with members and associations and locals and teams. And that was one of the things that I pride myself in doing. It's been done with integrity, and most everything is still there today. The foundation of a sports governing body is still there today. That's one of the fun things that I did, was doing good, building a sports governing body, a provincial sports governing. The other thing that I had fun with, and that I was very happy to do, is we created situations for the Can-Am League. There was a league with Canadian teams and American teams playing, but it had no status. And a few guys from the Quebec Lacrosse Federation, I'm not sure people know this, were at a CLA meeting, and we solicited and obtained, on behalf of the Can-Am League, associate membership within the Canadian Lacrosse Association. I think it was 75 or 76, thus allowing Can-Am teams to play directly into the Senior B President's Cup every year as a Can-Am team. So that allowed them to have membership within the CLA, which they didn't have before. That's one of the contributions I think I've led, which was a fun thing for me to do. The other one was being involved with the Iroquois Lacrosse Association at a time when the Iroquois Lacrosse Association was trying to get a certified membership, but trying to get members. Provinces being the members of the CLA, there was the OLA, Quebec Lacrosse, Nova Scotia, BC. The ILA didn't have members because the members were members of the provinces. In our case, Akwesasne, Kahnawake, Kanesatake were members of the Quebec Lacrosse Federation. Tyendinaga was a member of the OLA. The Brantford area was member of the OLA. So we started with Mike Mitchell, who was the ILA president, with simple working agreements, exchange programs with ILA. And it dawned on us at a time, speaking nation to nation, that we should allow Kahnawake, Kanesatake, and Akwesasne to become, for the purpose of lacrosse, members of the ILA. So Quebec decided, and we thought Ontario was going to do the same thing to strengthen the ILA. That didn't happen. So we negotiated with Mike Mitchell that those territories were, for the purpose of lacrosse, on a nation-to-nation basis, considered members of the ILA, even if they were geographically or partly geographically within the province of Quebec. And I remember Mike Mitchell, that was done in Ottawa in a boardroom, and there was Quebec and ILA delegates. And when it was over, Mike stood up and he said, "Voila," which means there it is, shook our hand. He didn't need to thank us. There was no need. It was done to make sure that the ILA would have legitimate members of its association. That was a fun thing. I had fun doing that. We had fun. And Mike Mitchell was a fantastic person to negotiate with. Tough, fun, straight. That was fun. The other things, I have very, very good memories of the Pro League in 74, 75. And somehow I was partly responsible for the start of the Quebec Caribous. Caribous, where they played in Quebec in the National Lacrosse League in 75. Very quick story about that. I'm in Valleyfield, August 1974. We're organizing a provincial midget championship. Things are there, everybody's ready. And I'm in the stands watching, and in comes the mayor of Baie-Comeau, because his midget team was playing the Montreal midget teams in the finals, and I had known the mayor because we had traveled to Whitby in 72 for a Pee Wee championship, so we befriended. He walks in with a gentleman by the name of Marius Fortier. Everybody in Quebec knows Marius Fortier as the owner of the Quebec Nordiques of the World Hockey Association. Marius Fortier is there, and the mayor says to him, "You want to know about lacrosse? Talk to Pierre." So Marius Fortier knows nothing about lacrosse. We're watching a midget game, and he says, "Okay, what's happening?" Well, I said, 2 teams, just like hockey. Face off, 5-on-5, goaltender, and we go on, and we spend the whole game telling him what it was all about, I knew the players because those guys, those midget age kids, were going to be on the Canada Games Quebec team for 77. Anyway, the game is over. Baie-Comeau wins it, something like 10-9. And he turns to me and he says, "You've convinced me. This game has a great future. I'll buy the Syracuse team." The Syracuse team was one of the 6 NLL teams in 74, and they had difficulties. And he just, so I'm saying, "What is this?" And he says, so my first reaction was to say, "If you buy the Syracuse team, you're going to get Travis Cook." And he says, "Who's Travis Cook?" I said, "Travis Cook's probably the best player on that team." So I think that was on a Sunday or Saturday or Sunday. On the Wednesday, he took out $25,000, bought the Syracuse team, brought it to Quebec City with the help of the Quebec Ramparts, the junior team, with ticket sales and promotion, and the Ramparts were helpful. The Nordiques were helpful. Started out the season, was a terrible team, and then they peaked and peaked and peaked and peaked, and at the end they won. They beat a Bishop team in Quebec City in front of full house. That was a fantastic story because I have the impression that I was somehow helpful in getting that team to Quebec City. And he was thankful to me. He gave me a season ticket on the catwalk, and he gave me a parking spot because he said, "You're going to drive from Montreal after work, and Montreal to Quebec is 2.5 hours, so you won't need to look for a parking space. Here's your parking space for you." So I used to drive after my work day down to Quebec City, arrive 10 minutes before the game, have my parking ticket, my season ticket and watch his games and go back home. You know, he was a great man. He was a fantastic, sports-oriented, rich person, very simple person, very accessible, and humble. You know, he was a nice man. He passed away some years ago, and I was given a Caribou jersey with the name. Yeah, well, that's what I brought for you. That's what they gave me when they had this. That was the Caribou thing, and they gave me Marius Fortier's sweater with 75 being the year that they won. So I keep this as a souvenir, and I kind of remind myself that was a good year for the Quebec Caribous, because by chance I met Marius Fortier and sold him on the game. I wasn't a Quebec fan. I was a fan of the game. I helped create a team, but I don't get into being partisan that much. You know, I say to people, when you're a builder, you're not concerned about who wins the game. Right. You're concerned about the state of the game. So my contribution there was one team in the NLL. So when you're involved with building the game, you see fantastic players, but you don't develop this partisan relationship to them. You develop a relationship to the game. So it's the state of the game that's important, not the score of a game.
What was it like when Montreal played Quebec?
It was the same thing when the Montreal Canadiens played the Quebec Nordiques when they were in the National Hockey League. It was the same thing. I think you have an expression in English that says there is no love lost between people. There was no love lost between the Quebec Caribous and the Montreal Québécois. They played the game. They didn't really like one another.
There's a number of sticks you have with you, and each one has a story.
There was a great stick maker by the name of Matthew Etienne, who was in Oka, which is Kanesatake. And Matthew made sticks for the pro teams in 74 and 75. And his stick was the Etienne Martin, which was a fantastic box stick at the time, and most players would go over and buy their stick, the pro players, you know. And there were outstanding accounts, and when the league fell apart, Matthew was left expecting checks that never came in. So somehow, with a friend of ours at the Quebec Federation, we helped Matthew recover and collect some of his money and get government funding to create and improve the factory that he had. And he was with us at the Quebec Federation for 2 or 3 years, and we took him to CLA meetings where everybody obviously ended up knowing who he was. And Matthew was very grateful, and he kind of saw what my job was like, politically, financially, technically, administratively, and I don't want to say he was in admiration for what I was doing, but he kind of liked what I did, you know. So one day he says, "Can you come to the factory?" And I say, I go to the factory, and he gives me, I think that was probably 77. And he gives me this huge 10-foot stick. And I say, "What is this?" And he says, "You have a big job. You need a big stick." So he gave me this. It's been with me ever since. I don't play with it. But it's a souvenir of a great man with a great heart. He was just a very kind person, had no malice, absolutely no malice, and he was very friendly to everybody. And somehow in Quebec, we loved him. He was a great man. So that's the first stick he gave me. The other one I have is far different. Matthew didn't have children, okay? His factory was called Matthew Etienne and Son. So when my first son was born in 78, he called, and my son was born in September, called me up about in December before Christmas. And he said, "Pierre, can you come over to the factory?" So I told my wife, "Oh no, not another 10-foot stick, you know, there's no way." So he gives me this, and he said, "From Matthew Etienne and Son to Pierre Filion." and son. You know, so he brought this little. It looked like an Etienne Martin. It has the same. We never played with it, but it's a nice little souvenir that my son has, and has kept it ever since. He's kept it. Nobody's touched it, and you'll see the leather is not as flexible as it was when he gave it to me. But this stick now is probably 40 some years old, and it was another good memories that I have with Matthew Etienne. These two are quite. In 1982, I attended the World Championship in Baltimore.
Yes.
There were 4 nations playing: England, Canada, United States, and Australia. And I was amazed. It was not my discovery of field, because we had discovered field before, but I was amazed at the fact that such a great game only had 4 countries. So I came back to the Quebec Federation. I said, listen, one of our best contribution to the game should be in international development. Somehow the game will get notoriety when it becomes an international game or an Olympic game. And the Quebec Federation said, let's do it, let's get on board. So we started going internationally to new countries where lacrosse was totally unknown, until we played in the Czech Republic, which was called Czechoslovakia at the time. So I was there in '86 in the Czech Republic, having exchanged communications and letters in Czech and in English with Tomáš Brian, who was a scout on teams, and they played this brand of lacrosse. It was an aluminum stick. They played with a tennis ball, and they cradled downwards, and they could shoot sideways, this way, or underneath. Played on a large field, and when I got there, I asked, where did you get this from? And it was from our history books. They said when we saw North American Indians playing a game called lacrosse. So they called this Czech lacrosse. It was a very simple, you could see it was handmade, a cork at the end to champagne cork or bubbly water. I played against the Czechs, or with the Czechs, and in '87 we took a Quebec team there, and before we started, we had never played. So we were on this field where it's fans, and there were these great athletes moving the ball. And the team captain comes forward with the translator, so we all gather at center, and he tells us in Czech something that obviously we don't understand. So the translator says, what Martin just said is, this is the ball. Look at it, you won't see it again. And we played, and we never saw the ball. It was a fast game, body contact, stick contacts, very respectful. And when we played half a game, and obviously we didn't cope, we couldn't, so we mixed teams, and then tried with Czech people who didn't understand English, and us guys didn't understand Czech, to get together, Anyway, so it was given to me, and I've kept it since, because it was. The other Czech thing, which is most surprising, is this. This was given to Simon Lajoie in 1988. It's the first wooden stick that was made by Martin and Vlaja Pešek, who were the people Simon lived with when we were the 3 days in Prague in '87. We had brought, in '86, we had brought 25, 30 wooden sticks that I'd left there. In '87, we brought 50 box sticks that we'd collected from former Quebec players, telling them we're going to help develop the box game in the Czech Republic. Can you give us your second stick? So we were carrying 50 sticks with us. So the Czechs figured, and the Czechs are pretty good at getting things done, and they built this. I don't know what type of wood it is. I wouldn't know. I asked Simon what wood, and he told me it comes from a tree. And so I said, oh, okay, big help you are, But you see, Martin and Vlaja made it, gave it to him from what they saw of the wooden sticks that we had brought. So nobody ever played with it. It was a gift. This one is from Wes Patterson, I was privileged to know Wesley and Carol, and we stayed with them quite often, and I traveled with them. I attended tournaments in the United States where they had a booth. And Wesley was making mostly women's stick.
Yes.
And at the end of his life, he asked me, do you want to be one of the person I give a stick to? And I said, Wesley, sure. And he says, what do you want? I said, listen, you make wooden sticks. If you give me a wooden stick, a woman's stick, it'll be perfect with me. So somehow I was number 8 on his list. I never used it. It was never used. And I remember when he passed away, everybody who comes to my house would see the Patterson stick,
yeah.
you know, and from Tuscawee Crafts,
yes.
and he was a Tuscarora Indian,
Yeah.
A huge, fantastic man. And one of the vivid souvenirs I have was taking my family there, and at the time my second son was 3 years old, and Grégoire didn't speak English, obviously, and Wesley didn't speak French, obviously. And I see them walking, and Wesley was probably 6'6", 6'7".
Yeah.
He had hands like, you know, and he had this hand down, and Grégoire was walking with him, and he had his hand up, and they're walking hand in hand, and they were talking. Who understood whom? Nobody will ever know. What did they say to one another? Nobody will ever know. And then we went to his house, and Wesley took Grégoire on his lap, and he was, you know, what you do it all with kids. And Grégoire would just about touch the ceiling. He would put him up, had the time of his life, you know. And he remembers, my son Grégoire remembers that day with Wes Patterson.
Wow.
And we all remembered that day. Yeah. And we all remember Wes Patterson, you know.
Yeah.
So he gave me this. This is a souvenir that that I cherish, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the final one is basic. That's an intercross stick that somehow we ended up manufacturing. That's the stick we took to Europe. I was fortunate to be the first Canadian to introduce lacrosse to about 15 countries. I traveled with those sticks, you know, and people would just enjoy. It was so easy to play because of the bar and kept the soft ball in it. And that was a success, and it created probably 12 or 14 national federations. And I think of it as our contribution to the international development of the game. And eventually, when lacrosse will be an Olympic sport, played in some city, somewhere, I'll be home and I'll be a very happy camper, because I will have had the impression that I contributed somehow to the development. I have thousands of stories of the people I met and the languages that I tried to learn, and the fun, the pure fun of seeing people who had never played an aerial game catch, pass, throw, score. It was not with kids, it was with teachers, it was with sports directors, it was with technical people from other sports who would pick this up, and they would be successful quite quickly. You know. Can I tell you a story about my friend Czesławas Garbaliauskas?
Yeah.
Very quickly. We're in Hungary. There are 400 teachers from different countries of Europe for an international sports seminar. So we took a delegation of people who could speak different languages. So we had Czechs, we had Germans, we had French, we had Italian, we had Canadians. So we figured there's a good number of languages that we can touch base with or relate. And I speak French, I speak English, I speak a little Spanish, I speak Italian, but I can't speak German and I can't speak Russian. Anyway, there are 400 people, and there are 10 emerging sports to be discovered, lacrosse being one of them. First day, 40 guys, all in shorts and running shoes from different countries. And we're on the court, and we have sticks, and we have ball, and we have technicians, and then I noticed this huge guy sitting there with a tie, shirt, you know, and he has a notebook. So I go to him and I said, Pierre Filion, lacrosse. And he says, Czesławas Garbaliauskas, Ministry Education, Lithuania. I don't speak Lithuanian. But we had the Czechs who speak Russians. They wouldn't speak Russian to him. Maybe the Czechs didn't like the Russian. They wouldn't speak Russian to him. So I'm left there and said, Czeslovas. So he takes out his shoes, takes off his shoes, takes off his jacket, unties, and then he's there for the full session. That was the first session. He was sent by the Ministry of Education to discover 10 new sports and bring back the knowledge to Lithuania. After our first session, he comes to me and he says, oh, I say, yeah. 2 o'clock, we come again. We had 10 sessions during the week. He was there for all of them. Right? He was there for all of them. So the Lithuanian government didn't get much information other than lacrosse. And he only could say, Pierre, he said, Pierre, lacrosse, fantastic. That's the kind of comments we had with this from the French, from the Belgians, from the Czechs, from the Italians, from the Germans, from the Netherlands, from the Poles, the Hungarians. It was the same. It was a passionate discovery of something totally new that they could be successful in very quickly, and they would go back home and address the teachers union, the teachers association, the sports department, and they built this game. And now lacrosse eventually will be an Olympic sport.
So you were actually honored around that time with the Pierre de Coubertin Award.
UNESCO is the United Nations Sport Culture Organization. It awards in Paris every year a Fair Play Award. Fair Play Award is given to outstanding athletes, organizers, journalists, ministers who have helped promote the concept of fair play. We had brought this and we had created something called the Intercross World Games, where the national delegations would send their team, there are 12 players, and we put every name into a hat, took away the goaltenders, and from that hat picked players to be on the blue team, the gray team, the black team, the gold team. So you would end up with a Canadian, 2 Czechs, a Slovak, a German, 2 Italians, a Belgian, a Frenchman, and a Lithuanian. And that was your team. So obviously the concept there was to share knowledge, share expertise, and improve the players who were not as good as the top players on the team, because you would play, you know. Obviously, the concept was on communication, where you would have to go out of yourself because English was not the only language or the dominant language, and try to tell the Italians how to, you know, carry the ball and pass, and then you have to work with Lithuanians and Germans and Hollanders, it was Poles. So that game was created, the Intercross World Game. It's been happening since '87, and it still goes on every year. Is a festival of friendship, of lacrosse, where people go out of themselves to meet, to make friends, to discover the game, to play the game. Somehow somebody noticed, and we were awarded the Pierre de Coubertin Fair Play Award. It's quite impressive because, you know, I'm a very simple guy from Quebec, and I'm there in Paris with hundreds of people, international sportsmen, fantastic athletes, Olympic gold medal athletes who are there, and they're applauding Pierre Filion from Quebec for having created the Intercross World Games. The concept is fantastic. It's a little utopian, but there are other utopias in the world that make a lot of sense. Love, democracy, that makes a lot of sense. Fair play makes a lot of sense also. And we were honored with this. It's a humbling experience. It's fun, it's a recognition, and it goes to your heart because you've tried to do something good internationally. You've tried to bring people together, to go out of themselves towards others, and somehow someone notices and gives you this International Fair Play Award. It's a great souvenir.
Recently, you were given a great award of being inducted into the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame.
You've played lacrosse, you've been in the game. I've played lacrosse, I've been in the game. No one gets into lacrosse in order to be in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
When you start playing lacrosse, you have no idea what the Hall of Fame is. Right. And for a long period of your life, you just don't know what the Hall of Fame is because you're a builder. Your passion is one new player, one new team, one new league, one new province, and in my case, one new country. That's what you care about. That's what you do. And somehow I got this phone call, and somebody, and I got to tell you because it's a crazy story. My wife picks up the phone, and somebody speaks English, and so Nathalie says, 1 minute. She gives me the phone, and she says, an English guy. We don't get that many at our house. So I pick, and there's someone at the end who says he's Dean McLeod. I know Dean McLeod.
Yeah.
Dean McLeod never calls me. We met at annual meetings, CLE meetings, and we argued and discussed and disagreed and agreed. But Dean McLeod is not a household name. So I'm listening and I'm saying, this is a joke. This is a fantastic imitation of Dean McLeod. This guy's doing a great imitation of Dean McLeod.
Yeah.
After a while, I realized it wasn't an imitation of Dean McLeod. It was real, So he tells me, you've been selected as a builder for the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame. What do you say? I mean, you get into lacrosse gets into you, and then you evolve. You meet, you discuss, you try again, you build, and then it's a
wonderful honor.
It's something, and when I was inducted, I looked at the list of the people before me,
Yeah.
and guess who's there? Jim Bishop,
Yeah.
Travis Cook,
Yeah.
and I look at the names of the people that I either discussed, disagreed, quarreled, argued with. They're all in the Hall of Fame, and this guy from Quebec is now in the Hall of Fame with these fantastic people who were my heroes. I mean, Travis Cook is a hero. I love Travis Cook. Jim Bishop, I love Jim Bishop. Now I'm in the same category as these people, these outstanding people who've done. But to me, the people who should be honored are the people on the selection committee. Not because they chose me, but because of their contribution to the game. The people on the selection committee, and I have no idea who they are. The people on the selection committee are the curators of the game. They are the ones who are promoting by their selections the dignity of the game, the integrity of the game, the excellence of the game. So those are the people who should be in the Hall of Fame. Somehow they're on the selection committee and they select every year people who they think have done good. They're the ones, they're the real heroes of the Hall of Fame, the members of the selection committee. But they get no recognition, and they're probably humble people who have briefs in front of them and make a decision and select someone. When Dean McLeod, when I finally realized it was Dean McLeod, I was without words. There's nothing to say. I mean, it's just somebody out there recognizing that you've done good or that you've tried to do good, and they honor you by being in the same company as others who they have done good. The Bishops and the Travis Cooks of the world. Yeah. Those people have done good. I'm there. That's all.
Last word to you on anything you want to say or talk about for the last minute or so?
Very simple. You know, I know, and one day when it will be an Olympic sport, everybody in the world will know that this is the greatest game. It's a game that builds you. It's a game that allows you to try to be generous. Partly it destroys you. It creates huge difficulties for you. You make great friends, and you have people who are not quite friends in the game. But if I look back at my journey, it was fun from day one till the last day. It was difficult. It was difficult because it's not an easy thing to be the one-man staff for 43 years of a provincial association, being involved nationally, being involved internationally. It's not easy, but God, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And when that game will be an Olympic sport somewhere, I tell you, by God, I'll be happy. Because I will say to the people around me, I did my part. I did my part. I tried. And now others have picked up, obviously, and it's grown and it's developed. And now there are many countries. And one day the Olympic rings will be there and lacrosse will be there. And hopefully the people who will play in those first Olympic Games when lacrosse will be there, those people will bring another level of dignity, another level of excellence to the game. My understanding for myself is I was part of that. I helped. I did what I could. I brought it one step further, and now today it's finally there. So that's really all lacrosse can do for someone, is eventually make you very happy that the game has grown to another level. It will be an Olympic game someday. And I know in your household, people will say, Jim, you're part of it because you contributed. In my household, people will say, we did our part. We tried. And that's the fun of it. That's the game.